So you're walking down some sort of abandoned alleyway, and you have this sensation that somebody's watching you. You hear footsteps behind you, you start to shake, your heart starts to beat a bit, and maybe you start to sweat. Different situation, you're in a corridor, maybe you're at your high school, and you see somebody who you're attracted to. Your heart starts beating, you start to sweat a little, and maybe you start to shake. So these two situations are rather different from one another, and you're probably thinking you're feeling different emotions. However, in both situations, your body is undergoing the same exact physiological changes. If you had a heart rate monitor, they might be similar. If you were using for some sort of sweat skin response, you might get the same responses. You might get the same heartbeats, same amount of adrenaline pumping through your veins. So, what is emotion if it's this doing if two very different emotions are doing the same exact thing to your body? Maybe emotions aren't even real, or maybe emotions are just thoughts associated with these physiological reactions. So this is part of the thinking that Schachter and Singer had when they did the two-factor theory of emotion study that used students to see if they could appraise a situation differently based on their surroundings. So, getting into the background of the study, it talks about things that were proposed in the 19th century, namely what's called the James Lange theory, and another theory from the early 20th century called the Cannon-Bard theory of emotion. These are very, very non-empirically based theories that question what happens first, physiological arousal or the way you feel, the emotional label. They don't use the word emotional label. Um, so that's the key question. Which comes first, emotions or physical arousal? We talked about some studies after Schachter and Singer that tried to answer this question. We will skip these slides. Okay. Okay. So let's first identify the old school background of the study, the really older theories. Um, all of the theories take three things into account: an external stimulus, a physiological reaction, and an emotion. Uh, so this is true for the James Lange theory from 1890. This is true for the Cannon-Bard theory of 1929. However, for the 1962 theory of Schachter and Singer, they're going to add a fourth element, and that's the blue one, the appraisal or the evaluation. There's a cognitive element to your emotion. That word cognitive is key to this study. Even though this study is listed by Cambridge as a physiological or biological study, it easily crosses genres. You could even say this is a social study because it's about how people behave around others. But mostly it's a cognitive study, looking at the way people think and how they appraise situations. So the James Lange theory was proposed by two different people around the same time. One of them is William James. He's sort of like a rock star of psychology in the 19th century. He's considered the father of American psychology. He's one of the people who actually made the science of the mind a serious study. Before William James, a lot of the psychological theories were based on conjecture and hocus pocus. Just really strange things, almost akin to palm reading or reading people's bumps on their heads and things like that. So the James Lange theory states that we feel something that's physiological, and then we have the emotion. Cannon-Bard theory is different. It says that the emotion and the physiological occur at exactly the same time. They're simultaneous. And again, the two-factor theory says there are two factors that are occurring that cause emotion, not just physiological, but also cognitive, a label. So the example that was given is very similar to the pictures I used before. Imagine a man walking down alone a dark alley. A figure with a gun suddenly appears. The perception of the external stimuli is figure with a gun. Um, and this initiates a state of physiological arousal. The state of arousal is interpreted in terms of knowledge about dark alleys and guns, and the state of arousal is then labeled fear. So this is a very quick thing that happens in milliseconds, but broken down in a step-by-step fashion. I find that this slide is especially easy to understand. This is borrowed from a textbook for, I believe, it's the AP psychology textbook. Here's another example. Again, fear is used as the example emotion. I think this is one of the easiest emotions to use when giving an example. So one more time, James Lang theory. Your heart is pounding. You're in a state of arousal, which is not always what we think it means in modern English. Arousal could be any sort of excitement, negative or positive. And then there's the fear. Once again, Cannon-Bard kind of takes those two elements and puts them side by side, so they're simultaneous. And Schachter's two-factor theory adds this new element, and in this chart, it's the orange box, okay, the cognitive label. Here's one more pictorial image that I stole from the internet, with all due respect to whoever owns the copyright. Okay, Cambridge might ask sometimes some background questions or some questions based on theory. Often their questions are about methodology, procedure, and perhaps results. The first part of this question, what are the two factors in the two-factor theory of emotion, is something you should be able to answer right now. So Winter 2013 version 3 is the first set of questions we would like you to answer. And this will be handed in on Monday. There'll be a total of 3 questions, each with a part A and part B. I'm sorry, 3 sets of questions. There's 2, 2, 4, and 2, 2. It's confusing. So please pause the video and answer these 2 questions. If you're unable to answer B, then wait until you are able to. Okay, speaking of B, let's go right now to procedure. The participants for the study were 184 male students from the University of Minnesota. And sometimes you'll see it written as 185. I have it written as 184 here because one of the students refused to be injected with a substance, and being injected is a key part of the study. So you can put the number as 185 or 184, depending on your point of view. Technically it's 185, but again, one of them had a problem with the needle. They were given 2 extra exam points for each hour they were in the study. Based on what I know about the study, I don't think more than an hour was needed. 20 minutes in a waiting room, and then some time to fill out a self-report questionnaire. However, 11 students were rather suspicious of the Confederate or the Stooge. So if they reported that they suspected that they were in some sort of psychological observation or the Stooge was an actor, they would have their data removed from the study because it's sort of tainted. I guess you could say that they might have given into demand characteristics or not acted naturally. So we're shooting participants with a supposed vitamin or a drug, and we have to shoot them actually with adrenaline. It's a deception. And this is an independent group's design. And we're going to compare differences of how people feel based on which group they're in. Okay, so in one group we have what's called or epinephrine informed. Epinephrine is another word for adrenaline. They were shot with adrenaline, and they were told the real side effects of adrenaline, even though they were not told that it was adrenaline. There was a drug called Ciproxin, supposedly. And Ciproxin is supposed to be a new vitamin supplement to help people see better. So the epinephrine informed were not told they were being shot with epinephrine or adrenaline. They were told they were being shot with a vitamin, but told the real side effects. They were told they would shake, they would um, get warm or feel warm, and their heart would pound. The epinephrine ignorant were not told the side effects. The epinephrine misinformed were told false side effects. They were told they would feel numb, itchy, and have headaches. And then you have a control group or placebo group that were filled with saline solution or some sort of salt solution. Why is this independent groups? Because you really can't stick a needle 4 times in one person and have them do the same exact procedure. You cannot do repeated measures with this kind of study. So in other words, you'll never be in both the epi-informed and the epi-ignorant group. That would just be weird and somewhat impossible. Okay, so there were 2 emotions that were studied. The first emotion was euphoria, and the second emotion was anger. And in the euphoria condition, they would be put in a waiting room where a Confederate or Stooge would goof around, play around, do some silly things while he is waiting for his eye test. The anger condition, the Stooge will be complaining about a questionnaire that they had been asked to fill out, and we'll look at that questionnaire a little bit. You'll notice that in the anger condition, there's only 3 groups, 3 independent groups. There's no misinformed, and one of the beliefs was that the misinformed group was not giving them very interesting data for the first group, and they deemed it unnecessary for the study. 3 groups was enough. So let's look at what happened in the waiting room, starting with the euphoria condition. With the euphoria condition, the participants were in a room with a Stooge who would do 5 activities at least. One was flying airplanes, one was doodling, finding a rubber band and making a slingshot, hula hooping, and playing basketball with crumpled paper. These activities were assigned numbers on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being mildly active and 5 being very active. And there was something created called the activity index, which we'll look at later how that was calculated. But to simplify it, the activity index was as follows. The lowest activity or the least energy consuming activity or the least wild activity was doodling on paper. So the Confederate would draw pictures of fish on paper. The second, the number 2 is the basketball. Number 3 is folding a paper and making paper airplanes. Number 4 was the slingshot. And number 5 was hula hooping. Why is there a hula hoop in the waiting room? It just so happened to be there behind some drawers or some filing cabinets or something like that. So it didn't look too suspicious. It looked like some of this stuff was sort of hidden away, not too obviously out there. All right, that's something that's skippable, skippable, skippable. All right. Let's skip a lot of this, actually. I want to go right to the anger condition. Okay, we looked at that already. This is slow animation. Okay. Sorry about that. All right, so if the participant follows the actions, he was rated as being active using a certain formula. And we'll talk about that formula later. Now let's go to the angry condition. In the angry condition, there was no hula hooping, no good times. It was all complaining, complaining, complaining. And if you look at the source material, they give you some of the items that were on a questionnaire that the participant and the Stooge were asked to fill out. It starts out with the Stooge complaining about getting a needle. He's really upset that he got a needle because he was not told beforehand they would be getting some sort of injection of a substance. So now he's already angry. But as soon as he sits down, he starts looking at the questionnaire, he starts pointing out how ridiculous some of the questions are. And for example, one of the questions asks, "Do you hear bells?" Which is such a random and vague question that he starts to complain about it. What's most important is that he starts complaining about the really, really personal questions. And number 28 is the question that is the one you should know. It's the one that ticks him off the most, to the point where he actually crumples up the paper uh, and he throws it on the floor. Actually, let me get this exactly right. He says, "To hell with it. I don't have to tell them all this." And he sits for a few moments, then rips up the questionnaire, crumples the pieces, and hurls them to the floor, saying, "I'm not wasting any more time. I'm getting my books and leaving." And he stamps out of the room. The question that got him so upset was about his sexual life. How many times each week do you have sexual intercourse? And there's some sort of tick boxes or some sort of choices that are on there. However, after question 28, the questions increasingly get more detailed and personal. And I believe the last question of the study is, with how many men other than your father has your mother had sexual relations with? Um, Rather real, really disturbing question. So why does the questionnaire continue past the point when the stooge leaves the room? Well, we want to see if the participant is going to continue in his angry situation. Is he going to follow suit? Is he going to complain as well? Or is he going to just sit back idly and just fill out the questionnaire? Will he too give in to anger? Will his surroundings influence him to be angry? What's key about both of these conditions, whether it's the anger condition or the euphoria condition, is that the stooge follows a very routine script. He tries not to deviate from that script. Depending on how good of an actor is, maybe he's ad-libbing or being extemporaneous sometimes, but he has to stick to certain elements of the script. The most important thing in the euphoria is that he does the 5 actions in that order. He follows the same procedure and routine, and this is acting as a control. Same thing is true with the anger condition. You want to make sure you always leave at question 28. You always want to say the same thing. You always want to rip up the paper before you throw the paper. Okay, so with this in mind, go on and answer the next Cambridge question from Winter 2016, version 2. Describe 2 controls from the study by Schachter and Singer. Okay, let's move on to some methodology issues, some new ideas in methodology that we haven't covered yet. The first is what's called a double-blind study. As the participant and the stooge are going through their routine, as they're either engaging in activity or just watching the other person in an activity, the person who is observing on the other side of the glass, or the people on the other side of the glass of the two-way mirror, don't know if they were injected with adrenaline or the placebo, or what they were told about the side effects. So in other words, the people who are observing aren't aware of what condition of the independent variable they are in. And this is what's called a double-blind study. Double-blind study is both the participants and the researchers have certain information that is blind to them. They're both kind of in the dark. And we do this to keep researchers honest, to make sure that they're not fudging the data to fit their hypothesis. All right, this is a way to keep us from even unconsciously changing the data to fit what we want to happen. I use the example all the time of when I grade papers. If possible, I try to avoid looking at the name of the student. So I might flip the paper to the second page and grade that first so I don't see who I'm grading. Another term we need to know for methodology is what's known as inter-rater reliability, or sometimes this is called inter-observer reliability. It's a very easy concept. It's pretty much if you want good, reliable data, have more than one person look at what is happening. Have two people look at the same observed phenomenon. In the Subway Samaritan study, in the Pilyavin study, we see that there are two observers in the adjacent subway car, but that study does not have inter-rater reliability because the two women in the adjacent subway car are looking at different aspects of the passengers on the train. However, here, when we're seeing if the participant is playing along with the stooge or if he's ignoring the stooge, we're looking at the exact same checklist of behaviors. Okay, and again, I mentioned this before, they're looking through a one-way mirror. So if you think about it, this study has so many different deceptions happening at one time. You have an actor participant who is the stooge. You have a fake aim, which is to see if we can improve your eyesight. We have a fake drug. We have fake side effects. And now we have a one-way mirror in the room. Always be suspicious of mirrors in rooms that are near psychologists. Usually you're being watched. Let's say, okay, so yeah, we're looking for these four categories of behaviors from the participant in the euphoria condition. Category 1, do you join in with the activity? 2, do you initiate a new activity? Do you start to do something that wasn't on the original activity menu? So, for example, instead of playing basketball with the ball, with the paper ball, do I play soccer with it? That would be a new activity. Category 3 would just be ignoring, being like really uncomfortable, not making eye contact. And category 4 would be being a spectator or watching the stooge. Same thing is true with the angry condition, except there are more categories. There's agreeing with the stooge. Yeah, man, this questionnaire is awful. Disagreeing with the stooge, saying like, oh, well, I'm sure the doctors have a reason to know why my mother is such a loose woman. Category 3 would be a thing that was said that was neither positive nor negative or in agreement or disagreement. Category 4 would be coming up with your own ideas or your own complaints, initiating agreement or disagreement. And category 5 and 6 are the same as the previous condition with the euphoria. Do you watch him only, or do you avoid eye contact and ignore him? Okay, so we have two ways of collecting data. Obviously, this is observation. The second way we collect data is through self-report. This study is not terribly difficult in terms of what happens. I think it's difficult in two ways. One, what are we trying to prove? And two, how do we get and separate all this data in the end? How do we organize this data in the end? And we'll get to that in just a moment. If you look at the original study, there's something like 10 different tables of data, and it could really overwhelm you. Because if you think about it, for each condition, you have both observed data and self-reported data. So you have 2 for epi-informed, 2 for epi-ignorant, 2 for this, 2 for that. And then you go to the anger condition, 2 for this, 2 for that. So there's a lot to sort through, and I hope to make it sort of digestible and understandable in just a few moments. But for the self-report data, there were Likert scales used for things like your physiological reactions. Were you itchy? Were you sweaty? Was your heart beating fast? Things like that. But there was also emotional questions as well. For example, if you look here, this one's on a scale of 0 to 4, with 0 being I don't feel happy or good at all, and 4 being I feel extremely happy and good. And what we're hoping happens is that the epi-informed people, if two-factor theory is true, the epi-informed people should be the least happy, and the other groups might be more happy or happier. And sure enough, that's sort of what happened when you look at the data, and we'll look at that later on. With the angry group, however, it didn't work out that perfectly. Do I want to go to that now? Yeah, let's do this now. All right. So I said before, the activity index for observations had a formula. It's not a terribly difficult formula. It's pretty much what number was the activity? Was it ranked as a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5? And how much time did the participants spend doing it? And you can come up with numbers that way. So if I played basketball for 3 minutes, basketball is a level 2 activity, 3 minutes, that would be an activity index score of 6. Okay. And again, you can see the primary source footage, or not footage, the primary source document here. 5 hula hooping, 1 doodling, and of course 0 is I'm not doing anything. So with the data, with the results, I'm not going to throw numbers at you because not only do I think it's useless to memorize numbers, these are things you'll forget very easily, and I don't think that's the purpose of education, is to memorize numbers. Also, Cambridge has luckily never really required numbers for Schachter and Singer, whereas with other studies, maybe like Milgram, they do want some numbers. What we really need to know is, were they happy or were they angry? And if they were happy, who was the happiest and who was the angriest? Going to this worksheet real quick, the epi-informed group, who were told about the real side effects, should attribute their emotional states to internal bodily factors. They shouldn't be looking for external cues or external stimuli or external relationships to their heart pounding or their sweating or their shaking. Whereas with the other groups, they're more likely to say, hey, if I'm feeling this way, it's likely because I'm having a good time. So using this as an example, the epi-informed group would say, my heart's pounding and I'm jittery. It must be the drug that they injected me with. Whereas the person in the other groups, actually, I should probably get rid of placebo. Mostly the epi-ignorant and the misinformed, they should just say, I'm happy. Ignore the placebo word up there. And the same thing is true with the angry condition. My heart's pounding and I'm jittery. It must be the drug. And those in the epi-ignorant group should say, hey, I feel this way because I'm really pissed off. All right, this is what should happen. Unfortunately, with the self-report, this is what actually happened. The informed group were actually more angry or angrier than the ignorant group. So that's sort of like the part of the study doesn't really align with the theory of two factors. However, the majority of the other data does conform to two-factor theory. So what I asked students to do is I asked them to look at the numbers, but not to memorize the numbers, and just look at the numbers so you could rank the four groups, who has the highest number, who has the lowest, for the informed, misinformed, ignorant, and placebo groups, or the saline group. So what we discover is for Euphoria, the highest was misinformed and the lowest was informed, and this is for both the self-report and for the observation. This is great news for two reasons. One is that the order is exactly the same. The most happy, least happy is the same in both conditions. Both sets of data. So this aligns with what Schachter and Singer were looking for. If I know why I'm shaking, if I know why my heart's pounding, I'm not going to look for external explanations for my physiological state. I'm going to label my state as normal with perhaps a drug injected in me, whereas the other people would say, oh, I'm super happy. So this is cool. The angry condition, not so cool, except for the observations. This is weird. The informed group said that they were really angry on the self-report, or they were relatively angry on the self-report. However, if you look at their actions, they were actually quite neutral. So that being said, 3 of these 4 lists, euphoria self-report, euphoria observation, and angry observation, all conform to the two-factor theory of emotion. The one that sticks out is the angry self-report doesn't quite line up with the hypothesis. So I would say to you, take a moment to maybe memorize this instead of memorizing, you know, data with decimal numbers. Don't worry about p-values and things like that. That could just give you a headache. So you might be asked a question like to compare two groups rather than to say what their numbers were. Okay, so we talked a bit about the results. What I'd like you to do right now is do the last question for our homework over the weekend. All right, this is the third Cambridge-style question, directly taken from a test from summer 2015, version 1. Okay, you should be able to describe the activity index, and you should also be able to state the differences between these two groups here, the epi-ignorant and the epi-informed conditions. Okay, so you might want to pause this so you could do the homework here. All right, so once more, you're going to hand this in to us, Dr. Alper and I, on Monday on a separate piece of paper. Please don't do it in your notebook and then rip it out and make a mess of your notebook. A little preview of what we will do next week. We might talk about some of the overall conclusions that are based on the results. And of course, with the last day of any study that we do, we will do an evaluation of the study. You know, we could do a few of these right now, but we'll probably save most of this for Tuesday of next week. So generalizability, 185 or 184 students is a lot. Maybe you have a problem that they're all male. Reliability, we have two observers, so interrated reliability is there. We have controls, what the Stooge does. Application is going to be kind of hard. With most things, application could be applied to proving theories, and maybe it's useful for educational purposes. But as far as like application in like occupations in the real world that are not academia, it's going to be hard to find an application. Validity, lab study, probably not too high. And ethics, we'll talk about that on Tuesday. I'm sure some people have a problem with people were not aware they were going to get injected until the day they showed up. I'm sure there was debriefing, and was there long-term harm? Probably not, but I guess some people did feel uncomfortable for at least 20 minutes while they were in the waiting room. So let's save this for another day. Remember, the note cards are due next Wednesday, and then we'll have an assessment on Wednesday. Side 1 of the assessment will be multiple choice. Side 2 will be ACE-style questions. And keep in mind that I've made some changes to the note card list. The two in the box are new terms that were not on the original list. Okay, hope everything is going well for you with the study. Feel free to ask a question in the comments below. If you're not directly on the YouTube link because you're embedded in the ACE Psych website, then you could just find a way to the YouTube link by clicking onto the video title. All right, talking too much. Good luck.